want to welcome Jeff Ma to the conference. Jeff has been here since yesterday morning, but delighted to have you on stage. Many of you know Jeff from his role in the Bringing Down the House book, the 21 movie, the blackjack side of his life. You may not know that Jeff has started and sold multiple companies, including one that was announced last week to Twitter, so he's fresh off of a transaction with Twitter and a new relationship with Twitter. Jeff also might be a good subject for the network analyses that were done earlier today. If you spend a little time with Jeff, you found out how, or you don't have to spend time with him, other people know Jeff. Everybody knows Jeff. An example, I have a good source that tells me that he got to town yesterday without a dinner reservation, so he did what any of us would do, which is call the local NFL quarterback who got him into one of the better restaurants in town. Jeff, welcome to the conference. Glad to have you.
Thanks. It was the backup quarterback, the starting quarterback. So.
Okay, we're less impressed then.
Yeah.
Jeff, how is it that you got involved with people analytics?
Yeah, so my last company, let's see, 2 companies ago was a company in sports. And what we were trying to do was originally it was called ProTrade. We were trying to create a way for people to trade athletes like stocks. So you could actually buy the backup quarterback on the Philadelphia Eagles. And but there was a lot of analytics that went into that, and it was actually built on a lot of the work that Michael Lewis had written about in Moneyball. And so there was this whole kind of concept of my job and my role in that company was actually trying to come up with analytics for measuring human performance as it pertained to athletes. And so we ended up pivoting that company because this idea, which I'm telling everyone in this room and they probably find interesting, sports fans aren't typically like people in this room. They're very simple. They just don't think like, everyone's like, oh yeah, athletes are just like stocks. And you go to a sports fan and they're like, no, they're not. They're athletes. They're not like stocks, So we ended up pivoting that company into much more of a mainstream idea around building apps for in Facebook and on the iPhone and whatnot. And we ended up selling that company to Yahoo. And after that transaction went through, I didn't want to go work at Yahoo. Yahoo was kind of a mess at that time. I decided to take a year off. I traveled. I spoke at a bunch of different conferences. I went to like 40 different countries. And I thought about what I wanted to do next. And I wanted to do something that I thought had a chance to basically be a huge idea that could change a big industry. And I knew I wanted to do something around data and analytics, specifically as it pertained to how to sort of motivate people. And yesterday when I saw Daniel Pink, I told him your book Drive really motivated a lot of what we wanted to do with tenXer, which was to take data and analytics about the way people work and give them back to them to help them understand how to get better. So one of the things that's really interesting was when you talk about people analytics, it's an effing creepy word, right? Like everyone's like, and you think about like the great work that Ben is doing at Humanize, and at some level people get freaked out about that because they don't want to be measured. But no one ever thinks like, okay, well, how do we actually give this data back to the employees and make the employees better at their job? Everyone's thinking like, oh, Big Brother. But the reality is that this data could be super useful to people to actually help them become better. And the whole idea that Daniel talks about in Drive of intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation, and the whole gamification movement that I'm sure 2 years ago there were huge conferences on gamification. Everyone was talking about how video games can teach us about how to motivate people and all that kind of stuff. But at the core, video game motivation is all about intrinsic motivation. It's all about giving someone that next level or giving someone an ability to see that they're improving, right? And so if you combine the idea of people analytics, which is data that is about people's performance, with gamification, intrinsic motivation, you have like this holy grail that maybe you get people that work for you to understand how to become better independent of management. So that was sort of the vision behind tenXer when we started it, was like, how do we do this in the workplace? And we had this idea like so much of the world now work is captured in digital footprint or digital fingerprints, and whether it's SaaS-based services for CRM or email or Twitter or anything like that. So that was kind of the premise behind it.
What did you learn with your experience at tenXer? Because you do have to go out and persuade people, not unlike trying to persuade teams to use sports analytics. You have to persuade organizations that you can actually bring these things together. What did you learn about?
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities. I mean, when I worked in sports, so this is 10 years ago or 11 years ago when we were breaking in, And it was right around when everyone was thinking that the whole Moneyball thing was like bullshit. So we went in there, and I would go to I went to Jerry West, right? Jerry West was at that time, he was the president and general manager of the Memphis Grizzlies. And I remember we had at that time, Billy Beane was our face of our baseball organization, and Bill Walsh was the face of our football organization. So we needed an analogous basketball guy, and where do we turn but the guy that's the NBA logo, Jerry West. So I'm flying down to Memphis in August, which is a really nice time to visit Memphis, especially for someone who sweats as much as I do. So I'm like going down there, sitting across the table from Jerry West. I'm so excited. I'm like, oh, Jerry, we're going to do this. He goes, boy, I got to tell you one thing. And he dropped an F-bomb. He was like, I effing hate statistics. And I was like, okay, glad I'm in Memphis in August. Anywhere to go get barbecue? But I spent like 2 hours with him. And after spending those 2 hours with him, what I found is that he didn't actually hate statistics. He hated the way that people use statistics in basketball. He hated that people thought Allen Iverson was a good player but he needed 35 shots to score 35 points. It's like yesterday when Shane was talking about, the number is like you need, if you score as many points as you do take shots, it's not necessarily a good thing. So after 2 hours with Jerry, he was calling up his scouts and he was saying, hey, we shouldn't be measuring all rebounds the same. A rebound, offensive rebound that gets us another possession shouldn't be the same as one off a missed free throw where you're already in position. Or we should be measuring every time we deflect the ball on defense. And he's like literally calling his scouts. And then a week later, my cell phone rings and it's this strange Memphis number. And he goes, hey, Jeff, this is Jerry West. And I was like, okay, this is very odd. So that whole process of convincing someone that they hate, someone that hates statistics or wants to say that they hate statistics is similar to like what we faced, especially because tenXer focused primarily on software engineers. So we would go in, and the reason we did this, it was both a great, brilliant idea and a terrible idea at the same time. It was a brilliant idea because there's so much data available about software engineers, but it's a terrible idea because software engineers think of themselves as artists. They don't think that they can be measured. They don't think that metrics matter to them. And it's crazy, right? Because these are the guys that are the most technical and should be the most analytically inclined, but they're not. And there's been a huge movement. If you go and you talk to software engineering managers, a lot of them say no, I don't want metrics. I don't want to know. And the first thing they'll always say is, hey, lines of code. You shouldn't use lines of code to measure how good. And it's like, okay, of course. Duh. We're not saying that. That's like going and talking to a sports person and saying you shouldn't be looking at one statistic only, or you shouldn't be looking how many. Yeah, we know that. But the idea and the time of 3 years working at tenXer, spending time talking to I've talked to so many software engineering managers, so many directors of engineering, VP of engineering, and there is a movement where they're starting to accept it much more. And the reason is because, you're hiring these software engineers, and these companies have hundreds and thousands of them, and half of them have no idea what they do. And there's just this idea and this movement of software engineering is becoming the new manufacturing, right, in our day and age. And think about how well we optimize manufacturing for metrics. And if we don't do that in software engineering, we're really, we're missing.
Did you learn anything in those 2 or 3 years?
No, I learned nothing.
Nothing at all?
No.
You had it right from the beginning?
I learned a ton. I think that, there's a few things that we learned. One, this type of work that we're doing, so analytics, and all these things I'm going to tell you guys right now, you're going to be like, duh. But when you're an entrepreneur and you're so close to it, it takes you time to realize these things. And especially when you have a mindset of what you want to be. And for a lot of the time, I wanted us to be more of a consumer company. I didn't want to be an enterprise company. I thought enterprise is boring. I didn't want to work with big companies. I think big companies are boring.
So
but the reality,
how's that Twitter job going?
Yeah, it's great. Twitter is awesome, man. I'm excited about it. No, the funny thing is if you talk about Twitter and someone tweets about it, it seems like some people might see it at Twitter. No, what I learned, honestly, is that a lot of this stuff that we were doing around data analytics was really much more relevant for larger companies. And that's kind of an obvious thing, right? They have more management problems. They have more money. They have to solve these problems. They have more people. They have more data itself. And so basically the last 6 months of the company before we ended up doing the Twitter deal was all about chasing some big companies. So we were we kind of redid everything we were doing in the company, and we started going after these big deals of companies that were, north of 500 engineers, whereas the first 2.5 years of the company was spent chasing these companies that were like 10 to 50 engineers. So like I think one lesson is big company, and then I mean the rest of the stuff was like very consistent with what I already knew about analytics, which is that, that anytime you go into a new industry and push analytics, you have to like be very anecdotal in how you explain things to people. And
ironic, isn't it?
Yeah, and it was very similar. Honestly, it was very similar to sports. Like the whole idea of like people not wanting to be, nobody wants to think they can be measured, right? Nobody wants to think, and everyone, the idea, there's still this big feeling that like I'd rather make decisions based on my gut, the Jack Welch and all that kind of stuff, than using data to make decisions. And so, it's funny because it's just, I always say to people like, hey, if you're going to make a big decision in your life, would you rather want more information to make that decision or less information? And everyone's like, oh, more information. I'm like, well, that's all data analytics is, just giving you more information. So,
do you think that sports analytics is kind of at the vanguard of people analytics? To what extent are they, and what does that mean for what we might see in people analytics down the road?
I think there's a lot of similarities. When I think about, one of the things that I think Sendel said yesterday that resonated a lot with me was just this concept that people's behaviors change a lot over time, and so it's hard to.
What does that mean?
Well, he was basically I think that anytime you model something where you're like say poker, right? Poker's hard. Like blackjack is like this. The thing about so let's start from the beginning, right? So. Blackjack card counting is a very simple thing. I could teach anyone in this room how to do it in an hour, and it would just be up to you then to go be able to practice it. It's not some magic, I'm not Nate Silver is a witch kind of thing. It's like you just learn like how to do things and practice and practice and practice. Okay, now, there's a guy by the name of Daryl Morey, and you know Daryl, and when Daryl first got his job at the Houston Rockets, he's a great story. If any of you guys don't know about him, you should look him up. But basically, he was Northwestern Sloan guy, and then was working for the Celtics as a CFO role, and then started getting into analytics, and basically got hired by the Houston Rockets to be their new GM, and he's been their GM there. And when he showed up in San Francisco for a game they're playing against the Warriors, we had dinner together, and I was talking to him. I was like, man, Daryl, how can you do this basketball stuff? It's so hard. There's so many moving parts. Baseball is sort of like the ultimate sport to do analytics in because it's much more discrete, it's much easier to model. And we started talking about basketball, and it just sounds so hard. And he said, you know what? Baseball's really easy, so it's hard to gain an advantage. Basketball's really hard, so even if I can't do it perfectly, which I can't, but if I can do it 30% better than everyone else, there's a much greater opportunity to make changes. Okay, you're probably wondering where the hell is this conversation going?
Great
but basically, blackjack is really simple, right? Because there's no human behavior. You're not modeling human behavior. The rules are set out. The dealer doesn't make any choices. The dealer is doing, and you're only playing against the dealer, so it's super easy to model. And then if you take that to something like poker, where you really have to model what people are going to do to some degree, it's harder. And then what Sendel was saying yesterday was he was just saying like the way that if you're modeling the way people behave, like trends change, things change, and so your data set, if you're looking at like big data or machine learning, it becomes hard because you never know, like you always want to use as much data as possible, but when things aren't stable over time, you don't know if it's going to be the right data set to look at. So, but all that being said, if you think about people analytics, because it's so hard, if you can do it well, you're going to get an advantage, even if you can just do it on the margin, if you can improve things on the margin.
Jeff, you mentioned somewhere along the lines that with this blackjack team that you had back in the day when you were at MIT, you guys actually were paid not based on actual earnings, but you were paid relative to expected.
Yeah, so basically the way that the pay worked, and most times when I tell people about this, they get this glossy look in their face and they're really bored. But like, we recorded every situation we played in. And a lot of the situations we played in were positive expected value situations. And so the way that we were paid was based on a percentage of our expected value. It wasn't based on what our actual win was. So it would be like paying a hedge fund trader on their theoretical value that they're capturing with each trade versus what actually happened. Now, there was a bonusing component where if we won more than we should have won, we got bonused. And so, the idea, and you and I were talking about this idea of paying people based on what they theoretically should be, whether it's sales or whether it's hedge fund, or, I mean, the finance is the most obvious one.
Right.
It's kind of a fascinating concept because it creates slightly better, one of the things, like we were talking yesterday about Shane's talk, and I thought Shane was great. I've heard him speak before. He's super smart on this stuff. One of the things that he said that he kind of scared me about was when he was talking to LeBron James, and he was talking about, like, how do you convince LeBron James to use analytics? Well, he said, well, I just showed him something about Kevin Durant and then went out and it worked. But that's like frightening to me, right? Like, if you were trying to convince someone in your organization to use analytics, you wouldn't tell them, go and use it on this one person, and if they work out today, then you should believe in it. You would say, hey, let's look at a project over a year, and let's hope that over a year we do really well, right? So the analogy would be like, hey, Shane says LeBron, hey, let's do this for a season, and let's see how this goes. And the whole point of this is, like, if you can't be so focused on results in analytics, like, otherwise you're going to get screwed in terms of how you think about things. You're going to get biases introduced right away, recency bias and confirmation bias and all these types of biases that we know are hugely terrible in our ability to make decisions. If you look at small sample sizes or you look at just results, you're going to get into a lot of trouble. So this idea, going back to it, of paying people based on theoretical versus based on results probably creates a better incentive structure for people to do the right thing and focus on the process and not on the results, which is what I think at the end of the day, we all want the people that work for us to do.
So Sam Hinkie, who was, as you know, Daryl's...
I asked him yesterday to try to get me a reservation also.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Sam didn't come through for you?
Sam's like in Portland at some hoop summit. Yeah.
Sam keeps a low profile around here.
Yeah,
he may not be doing a lot of restaurants around here.
Yeah.
Sam has this, he said, I don't care.
Sam's the general manager of the Philadelphia 76ers, if you don't know.
And he was the assistant GM under Daryl Morey in Houston. And he has this quote that he doesn't care what happens, what he cares about is what should have happened.
That's apparent, right? Just kidding. Just kidding,
But
Sam.
it's exactly this emphasis on process, not outcome. And I'm fascinated that in cards there is this notion. There are these Sklansky dollars and variations on that, where you don't score your hand on actually what you earned, but you score your hand on what you should have earned given your cards and the other guy's cards.
Well, I think some of it, honestly, is this, like, it's this gambler's mentality. So, like, theoretically, what we did in blackjack and people that have an advantage when they gamble, they're not gambling because they have an advantage. So it shouldn't necessarily be called gambling. But everyone at the core is sort of a gambler, I think. And when you think about when you lose, you go back and revisit that loss, right? And you try to understand, like, did I make a good decision or did I just screw up, right? The famous story that I tell when I do my speeches is about losing $100,000 in 2 hands of blackjack. And that I lost it in probably the better part of 3 minutes. And I was 21 years old. And that obviously causes a lot of soul searching when that happens. And you go back and you say, like, what was the result? I know what the result was, but was the process the right process?
Right.
And so when you think of, like, the article you sent me, which is kind of all about using theoretical to understand what you should have won in poker, I think that a lot of that is, like, going back and saying, like, did I do the right thing? And can I quantify whether I did the right thing or not? The problem is if I play poker against you, you're not going to be like, oh, wait, you theoretically should have beat me, so here, let me give you my money, and then I really beat you.
But can you use it in firms? And this is, I have no idea, but the provocative idea, we love this idea, decision science, this is perfect. Let's pay on expectation instead of actual. You've run firms, you've paid people. Can you imagine paying that way in any version of it?
No, I can't, because I don't think people would get it. Like, this is such a results-oriented society. Like, regardless of what we say and what we talk about, it's such a hard thing for people to understand. Like, if you go to a blackjack table and you sit down and you have 16 and the dealer has a 9 up and I tell you to hit, which is the right thing to do. If you get 5 to make 21, I'm a genius. If you get 6 to make, or 7 to make 22, I'm a moron that they never should have written a book or movie about, right? That's just a huge difference when actuality, the actual decision was the right decision.
But Jeff, this is depressing. If you hire 3 people to run tenXer, you get to choose these guys. Lots of folks will want to work with you, and you're saying even those guys you'd have a hard time compensating. And
I guess it just depends on what field it is. Like I've never had I think the best one to understand would probably be like a finance, like a hedge fund or something like that. I could see doing it in a hedge fund, definitely. And I think that there are people that would be open to it. The problem comes in that in a hedge fund, well, so we talked about this, which is like, this is being, the hedge, like blackjack, we could do it because the numbers were so clear, right?
Right.
But when you come into a hedge fund, there's still some uncertainty in your models. Like, you might be paying someone on this theoretical model that sucks. So why would you want to pay them on that? So I think it's a provocative idea. I think it's probably hard to implement in practice, though.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you think is coming next? You've been a little bit ahead of the curve at a few different times now. What are you thinking about now? What do you want to work on?
Well, I think this whole concept, like when I was looking at some of the stuff that they were doing with this networking and like I think there's so much data that we collect passively at our jobs that no one's doing really anything with. And that was really what tenXer was supposed to be. Like we felt, the Twitter deal was a great deal, but obviously, I don't think, like everyone looks at me and they're like, oh, you sold 4 companies, that's awesome. But like selling a company as an entrepreneur is it's not why you start a company. If you do, you're a shitty entrepreneur, right? Like selling is like the thing you do because it's your best option at the time, right? And you're basically giving up on your dream, which is to continue to build this awesome business. I think the idea of looking at passively collected data and combining it with HR data, and then maybe even combining it with like, demographic or, outside information is like the holy grail in terms of like looking at managing things like retention, regrettable attrition, employee burnout, that type of stuff. And I think like even within what we were looking at the end of tenXer was specifically at source control data for software engineers. So when you check in code, who's working on the same files, who's commenting on each other's stuff, who's reviewing each other's stuff, that type of stuff could dovetail really well into the work that Ben is doing at Humanize, where you're kind of understanding like how does information move throughout an organization. You can also understand what are people's patterns, how do they change over time. And again, like as we started to talk to people about this, initially there was a ton of resistance, but then as we got more and more into it, and especially like towards the end, there were a lot of companies that were bought into it and wanted us to start going in and doing real implementations with their data. But it's hard because it's a hard business because it's not really a SaaS business to start. It's like a consulting business. You've got to go in, you've got to like sit in this behind the firewall of this company, analyze a bunch of their data, and then give them some insights.
There's very little off the shelf that you can drop.
Yeah, it's hard, and that was for me personally. That was hard because I'm not a consulting company. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I think that we struggled a little bit.
People worry a lot about passive data around issues of privacy and getting over that hurdle. I know Ben worries about it a lot in his firm. What did you learn about how to assuage those concerns?
There's not.
No?
I mean, like the funny thing is, please no one tweet this out. But we were talking to. Well, I won't name the company. We were talking to a very large vendor of cloud-based services, a company that basically refuses to do installations that aren't cloud-based, and they use 0 cloud-based services themselves. So to the point where I was like, are you effing kidding me? Your tagline is basically this. Right. You guys can probably all figure out what company it was. But it's the dirty secret. So like a company like, are you guys familiar with Atlassian, right? They make Jira and Confluence. And they're the poster child for SaaS, right? Everyone's like, oh, this is this great business. They're up to like, I think 200 million in revenue. They're a private company. They're going to go public at some point. They're like the leaders in developer tools and whatnot. Like 85% of their installations are not SaaS. They're all sitting behind a firewall.
Wow.
So especially as you get into larger organizations, everyone's still freaked out about it. Like they don't want their data sitting on a cloud server. They want it where they can know that it's going to be. And it's silly because a lot of it's perception. Like so we work a lot with GitHub data, which is a cloud-based service for storing your code. and we integrate with it, and then people would come and say, oh, well, can we trust you? And we're like, well, you trust GitHub, you realize that, right? That's all cloud-based stuff. And so a lot of it is perception, but yeah, I think companies are still really freaked out about it.
So Jeff, we're down to just a couple of minutes. Mostly you've been talking so far about kind of the professional services world. You're selling something to somebody else. You're trying to persuade them. But you've also run companies. You've started companies. You've been leaders of companies.
Right.
You've been the manager.
Right.
What have you wanted in that role? What have you wanted more from People Analytics in that role, running your own firm?
Yeah, well, I think one thing is, so on a personal level, I learned a lot about myself in this last business, right? And for me, the key to building a business is and as obvious as this sounds, it's just the people you hire, right? And it's, I think that, when you think about the piece of people analytics around that, you basically just want these signals, right, to help you understand what's going on with your employees, whether it's issues that they're having, whether it's burnout. Like I would often mentally note when people came in and left, not because I cared that they were punching a clock or anything like that, but I cared because it was indicative of their motivation at the time. So understanding these simple data signals that, that say how active someone is, how happy they are. I don't want to always be micromanaging someone and say hey, are you okay? But I also want to know if something's wrong. And so that's kind of at the core of what tenXer was trying to be. Is we were trying to use data signals from passively collected data to give managers a better idea of whether their employees were struggling or were needing help or whether they were excelling. And even that's another great point, which is can the data tell you when someone's kicking ass so you can tell them at that time that they're doing a great job, because that's important as a manager, is to get someone at that right moment when they know they've done something good, to tell them that was something good.
I think it seems an important thing to emphasize the upside there and the potential for rewards there. It's not just security and concerns and risk. It's knowing when those good things happen as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Jeff, thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. Wish you the best with the work.
Thank you.